The sun was just dipping below the horizon when Emily staggered home, her knees raw and bleeding from the gravel. Her once white dress was torn, her hands were scraped, and her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Just hours earlier, the rich heirs of the Blackwell family, the wealthiest and most powerful family in the county, had humiliated her in front of everyone. They had mocked her accent, her tattered clothes, and her quiet nature. But then they crossed a line. They had forced her to crawl on her hands and knees like a dog in the middle of town, laughing, filming, and shouting commands as though she were an animal. Emily's father, a humble farmer, had taught her to bear hardships in silence. "We're not made to fight their kind of battles, Emily," he would say. "We live by dignity, not pride." But as she scrubbed the dirt off her hands that night, staring into the cracked mirror above the sink, she felt something ignite inside her. A fire she had never allowed herself to feel before. For the first time in her life, Emily decided she would not stay quiet. The Blackwell family wasn't just rich, they owned nearly everything in the county. From the chain of luxury hotels to massive agribusinesses, they controlled jobs, land, and even politics. People whispered that their empire was worth more than $330 million. And they wielded that wealth like a weapon, crushing anyone who dared to stand against them. But Emily knew something the rest of the town didn't, something she had discovered years ago while working part-time on one of their farms. She knew their empire had cracks. Emily wasn't just a farm girl. She was brilliant with numbers, computers, and problem-solving. She had quietly taught herself coding and business analytics on a second-hand laptop she had bought with money from selling eggs at the market. When she had worked on the Blackwell farm, she had noticed records that didn't add up. Overpaid contracts, false invoices, and hidden debts. Nobody had listened when she tried to point it out, but she hadn't forgotten. That night, still bleeding and humiliated, she pulled out her old laptop. Her trembling hands became steady as she typed. For weeks, Emily worked in silence. By day, she milked cows, fed chickens, and sold vegetables at the farmer's market. By night, she dug deeper into the Blackwell empire. She tracked their shell companies, their overseas accounts, and their corrupt dealings with local politicians. Every discovery fueled her resolve. The same people who had spat on her family's poverty were living off fraud and exploitation. She was going to expose them. But the challenge wasn't just gathering evidence, it was fear. Fear of retaliation, fear that nobody would believe a poor farm girl over the wealthiest family in the state. Fear that her father's farm would be burned to the ground in revenge. Every night, she whispered to herself, "They made me crawl like a dog. But I will rise higher than they ever imagined." Emily. The laughter still echoed in her ears as Emily stumbled across the dirt road that led to her family's small farmhouse. The evening sky was painted red with the last light of the sun, but for her, it felt darker than midnight. Her knees were torn open, bleeding from sharp stones. Her palms stung with gravel burns. Her hair was matted with dust. The memory played over and over, like a cruel nightmare she couldn't wake up from. They had forced her to crawl. Not just crawl, but to crawl on her hands and knees through the main street of town while they jeered, kicked dust at her, and called her names. Dog. Beggar. Pathetic farm trash. The sons and daughters of the Blackwell family had stood over her like predators circling their prey. Phones out, recording, laughing, making her humiliation eternal. Emily was known as the quiet girl, the farm girl who never caused trouble. She didn't have fancy clothes or expensive shoes. Her family didn't have money to spend at the mall, and she didn't attend parties like the others. Instead, she spent her days helping her father on their struggling farm, feeding chickens, repairing fences, and selling eggs at the local market. People saw her as harmless, insignificant. But that night, as she washed the dirt and blood from her hands at the cracked porcelain sink in their farmhouse, something in her snapped. She looked at her reflection, eyes swollen, face streaked with tears, and she whispered to herself, "No more. They will never do this to me again." The Blackwell family's grip. The Blackwells weren't just bullies, they were kings and queens of the county. Their fortune, worth more than $330 million, came from everything: luxury hotels, massive farms, trucking companies, even the local newspaper. They had politicians in their pockets, judges at their dinner table, and police chiefs on their payroll. People feared them. Nobody dared to oppose them. If you worked against them, you lost your job. If you spoke out, you were blacklisted. And if you pushed too far, you mysteriously disappeared from town. But Emily had one advantage that nobody suspected. She was smarter than she looked. The secret she had kept. Years earlier, Emily had worked on one of the Blackwell farms, helping file invoices and data for extra pay. That was when she noticed the numbers didn't add up. There were inflated contracts, fake vendors, and endless streams of consulting fees that led nowhere. At the time, she was too scared to say anything. Who would listen to a poor farm girl? But she had quietly saved copies of files, invoices, and records, hiding them on her old, second-hand laptop. Now, bruised and humiliated, Emily knew why fate had shown her those things years ago. It was her weapon. The silent war. For weeks, Emily lived a double life. By day, she carried buckets of water, harvested corn, and tended livestock. Neighbors saw her as the same quiet girl, and the Blackwells believed they had broken her spirit. But